how different could the NBA have been if it weren't for the salary cap scandal involving Joe Smith and the Minnesota Timberwolves? Would the Timberwolves have had more success in the NBA? Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today we'll be taking a look at the salary cap scandal involving Joe Smith and the Minnesota Timberwolves. This scandal ended up heavily impacting the career of legendary forward Kevin Garnett and changed the league drastically. Let's dive into Kevin Garnett first. His full name is Kevin Maurice Garnett, but he was quickly nicknamed KG on the basketball court. He first started his basketball career in South Carolina, where he played during high school for 3 seasons before transferring over to a school in Chicago. By that time, he was 6'11" and was an absolute force on the court. He averaged 25.2 points, 17.9 rebounds, 6.7 assists, and 6.5 blocked shots per game en route to a city championship. Not surprisingly, he was named the National Player of the Year by a few different organizations, as well as being awarded with the Most Valuable Player award during the McDonald's All-American Basketball Game. Obviously, he was being heavily scouted by NBA teams during this time, as there were multiple organizations interested in drafting the young man. He ended up declaring for the upcoming draft and was selected by the Minnesota Timberwolves during the 1995 season. The club took him with the 5th overall pick in the first round straight out of high school. But it didn't matter that he didn't get any college experience. He was a menace in the NBA very quickly. In only his second NBA season, he led the Wolves to their first ever postseason appearance and was named to the All-Star team. Shortly after that season, he was inked to a very lucrative extension that got him $126 million over the next 6 years. It's safe to say that the Wolves had no intentions of letting their superstar player walk away in free agency. Throughout the rest of his time in Minnesota, Garnett was able to make the All-Star game in 10 out of his 12 seasons and was named the most valuable player during the 2003 season. Unfortunately for the Wolves and Garnett, they were only able to make it past the first round of the playoffs one time during his stint there, and they didn't go very far after that either. A few years after that, the Wolves decided it was time to move on from their current roster and traded Garnett to the Boston Celtics for a whopping 7 players. As you would expect, KG was able to wreak havoc as usual, but in a different environment. He was named the Defensive Player of the Year during his first season with the club and was partnered with great teammates in Ray Allen and Paul Pierce. That year, they were able to march their way into the NBA Finals and win an NBA championship in 2008.
Anything's possible! Anything's possible!
They weren't done yet either. Garnett led this aging Celtics roster to the finals a few years later during the 2009 season, but lost to the Los Angeles Lakers in a series that lasted the full 7 games. After that finals loss, everything began to change for the Celtics organization. That next season, Garnett led the team back to the conference finals, but they were unfortunately defeated. Upper management then made the decision to move on from their superstars and begin their rebuild. They traded both Pierce and Garnett to the Brooklyn Nets during the 2012 season, and everything went downhill for KG after that, averaging only 6.6 points and 6.7 rebounds per game as a member of the Nets. He suffered various injuries and was clearly not the same player that the team traded for. They eventually shipped him back to the Timberwolves 2 seasons later. He averaged only 3 points per game with the team and was majorly there as a mentor for their younger players before he officially retired as a member of the Wolves in 2016. Now flipping over to the main culprit of the story here in Joe Smith. When Smith first started his NBA career, he was heavily sought after by multiple teams. He had a very successful few years in college, which saw him take the honors of the Naismith College Player of the Year as well as the consensus first-team All-American team. Smith actually declared for the draft in 1995, the exact same class that Garnett declared for, and shockingly enough, Smith was considered a safer selection than Garnett. Smith was selected with the 1st overall pick by the Golden State Warriors and actually had a very solid season in his rookie year, averaging 16.9 points, 8.6 rebounds, 1.3 assists, and 1.4 blocks per game on 45% shooting from the field. He may not have been the superstar that Garnett ended up being, but he was a very solid role player that could improve any team. To the disgust of fans around the world, Smith turned down a 5-year, $80 million contract extension from Golden State and instead wanted to go and compete on the East Coast. The Warriors accepted his decision and traded him to the Philadelphia 76ers, where his numbers dropped drastically. But regardless, he entered free agency as one of the top players who could pick up an average of $14 million per year with the right team. But here's where the situation gets interesting. Smith ended up accepting a one-year, $1.75 million contract from the Minnesota Timberwolves. He was coming off a few good seasons and was still such a young player that this move ended up shocking fans and even other organizations. This gets even weirder when you realize that he just turned down an $80 million contract the year prior. He finished that season up with the Wolves and was a great center and small forward to pair with Garnett for that year. He entered free agency again with the same expectations, but once again signed with the Wolves for 1 year, just $2.1 million. After this decision, the NBA began to open an investigation into the subject. The league found out that the Wolves were dead in the center of a salary cap evasion scandal with Smith. The two sides had come to an agreement. The Wolves asked for Smith to sign 3 straight one-year deals that were all to be worth a small amount of money. After those 3 years were up, the Wolves would then earn his bird rights and would be able to sign him regardless of their salary cap situation at that time. Minnesota promised him a 5-year, $86 million contract after those 3 seasons, which is why he stuck around for as little money as he did. This was obviously in violation of the NBA Code of Conduct. Think about it. If this was allowed in our league today, the Lakers would simply promise all the best players to sign with their team for cheap and promise big payouts later on. This just couldn't happen in the league. So the NBA finally took action on the two sides. The league renounced all 3 of Smith's small one-year contracts with the team so that the Wolves wouldn't have his bird rights anymore, costing Smith a boatload of money in the long run that he wouldn't be able to get back. Then they fined the Timberwolves organization as a whole for $3.5 million and suspended owner Glenn Taylor and general manager Kevin McHale for a full year. Then came the largest and most excruciating part of the punishment. They stripped the Wolves' first-round picks from 2001 until 2005. However, the league did determine that this punishment was too harsh and gave them their picks in 2003 and 2005, but the damage was still done. Without all those picks and very little cap room, the team wasn't able to build a talented roster around Garnett, wasting his best years of basketball. So what players did the team miss out on during those years that they lost draft picks? Let's take a look. In the 2001 NBA draft, the team would have selected in the early 20s of the first round. That pick could have netted them one of Zach Randolph, Gerald Wallace, Tony Parker, or Gilbert Arenas. Any of those guys would have tremendously benefited this team in so many ways, but it just keeps getting worse. In the 2002 draft, they would have been in the early 20s once again. There were guys like Tayshaun Prince and John Salmons available that could have given their team so much help at the shooting guard position, as well as on the defensive end where they were struggling. Their next strip draft pick came in 2004, and wasn't all that important as the Wolves were able to pick up the best record in the league that year. Even though they didn't have a ton of noticeable names available at that time, the depth alone could have helped this team out. Garnett was one of the best players of his generation and was the unlucky party in some very mediocre teams over the years. He had a few terrific teammates in Sam Cassell and Latrell Sprewell, but they just never had a championship roster in Minnesota. The Timberwolves had looked for a co-star to pair with Garnett for a very long time, but were never able to get anything done. Their most notable attempt was the trade for Ray Allen in exchange for Stephon Marbury during the NBA draft, which had quite a bit of potential until Marbury grew jealous of how much money Garnett was making. It's now only a distant dream of what could have been, as they could have bolstered their team with talent if they never had that Joe Smith scandal, and even would have had a little more wiggle room in free agency. Going back to Smith, he was never the same after that scandal broke loose, and was eventually turned into an NBA journeyman. He was labeled as a simple role player and ended up playing for 11 different teams in 11 years, with one of those teams eventually being the Wolves one more time. These types of stories are the definition of bad management and could have been entirely avoided had McHale just ignored Smith in free agency. Looking at the tape, you could tell he just wasn't that talented of a basketball player, but McHale had another plan in mind. While the plan sounded simple, even if it had worked, it wouldn't have benefited the team all that much, locking themselves in with yet another large contract for a player that honestly didn't deserve it in the first place. All we can do now is wonder how different the league could have been. Now that you've made it to the end of the video, make sure to check out the first link in our description. Leave us a like, subscribe, and share the video. Let us know in the comments below if you think the Timberwolves ruined Garnett's prime. You need to make sure to comment after you click the link. We want to reward our most loyal basketball fans. Make sure to keep watching more of our videos because they're amazing and you'll love them.